Hello? It is with great
I
pleasure.
think we have our participants here, I believe.
Oh, okay. Oh, there we
Okay,
are.
we got 25. All right.
Okay, there we are. Okay, good. Okay. But I'm not sure. Okay, we're live.
Uh, yeah, she said we were live now.
Okay, okay. Well, hello everyone out there. I can't see you all, but I can see that you are there. So we're going to go ahead and get started on this pleasant occasion. And it is with great pleasure I should introduce myself, I suppose. I'm Ann Mayhew. I've been around AFEE for a very, very long time, and I'm glad to be with you today, even if only virtually. Um, and it's with great pleasure that I introduce Chris Brown as president of the Association for Evolutionary Economics for this year. Um, I've known Chris for a very long time, at least since the mid 1980s, I calculated, when he earned an MA in economics at the University of Tennessee. Um, he went on to earn a PhD here at UTenn, where he wrote his dissertation under the supervision of Paul Davidson. Throughout his years as a student at Tennessee, and in the years since, I've counted Chris as one of the people I most enjoy talking with and corresponding with. In person, by phone, by email, we've talked of economics and economies, of university governance, of AFEE and the JEI, of political processes, writ small and large, and of beloved dogs. On occasion, Chris and his wife, Lyndon, have even brought their dogs through Knoxville so that we could picnic together by the Tennessee River. And needless to say, I have also enjoyed reading what Chris has written and have always learned as I read. One reason why Chris is so much fun to talk with and to read is that he's always working on some new problem or has some new approach to offer to an old problem. As a student, he often surprised me with the originality of his thought and with the courage with which he pursued paths not already well trod. Let me stress courage. It takes courage to devote time to reading and thinking about new material, and it takes courage to differ from the herd. Chris is and was always original in thought, and he has admirable courage. These are traits that he has carried with him since I first knew him. Now, this is not to say that Chris has ignored the work of earlier and other institutional economists. Indeed, I think that his book, Inequality, Consumer Credit, and the Saving Puzzle, should be read and reread by all who want to build upon the promising institutionalist macroeconomic theories that were largely abandoned because of the Marshallian roots of Keynesian and post-Keynesian economics. In that book, Chris truly builds upon Veblen and Wesley and Veblen's student Wesley Mitchell in a way that few other macroeconomists have. In many ways, he trained as a post-Keynesian, and much of his work can be considered post-Keynesian, but his deep roots are institutionalism. Just what that means would require another panel or two or three, and that's not what we're here for tonight. So we'll just save that for another day. Chris is also, but I do want to mention it because I think it is true that Chris, more than anyone else that I know of, goes back to those institutionalist roots that deserve to be developed more fully. Now, Chris has published considerable work in the JEI, just as one would expect of an AFEE president, but he's also published widely and well in a variety of journals devoted to the expansion of the horizon of economics. While doing that, he has also found time to serve as editor of the JEI from 2012 until 2019, served as president of AFEE in 2010 and 11, and he served on the Arkansas Governor's Council of Economic Advisors. advisors from 2011 until the present. He has also given considerable time to the governance of Arkansas State, not Arizona State, by the way, as it says in my program, but Arkansas State and the university where he's taught for the past 30 years. I'm grateful to Chris's service to AFEE and his service to institutional thought more generally. And as I have said, I'm glad of his ability to instruct and entertain with new ideas and/or with old ideas applied to new problems and issues. So for now, I want to hear about systems failures in the delivery of primary goods. And I have no idea what that's going to be about, but I want to hear about it. And I look forward to being surprised and educated yet again. And let me add, Chris, congratulations on a marvelous career. Chris?
Thank you very much, Ann. That is so kind of you. And certainly, I was very fortunate to be at the University of Tennessee during those years when we had such a strong institutionalist program and some amazing people. I did want to say something about my introduction to institutional thought. And this goes back to 1986. And I was taking a course in economic history from Walter C. Neal. And as was his custom, you would write papers in the course, and then Professor Neal would have conferences with the graduate students to discuss their papers. And I had written a paper in this course, and I kept it around just in case I might need it for an occasion like this. But I want to read a sentence from this paper. It reads, "The sharp edges of capitalism may be tolerated because, in the end, it is the system of economic organization that best coheres with democratic values." Okay, that's something I wrote in 1986. I'll read it again here. "The sharp edges of capitalism may be tolerated because, in the end, it is the system of economic organization that best coheres with democratic values." So I have my meeting with Dr. Neal, and I see my paper on his desk, and this particular sentence is in red quotation marks. And Dr. Neal said, "Well, you know, I've been thinking about that sentence, and I think I know what it means. It means that if capitalism and democracy met in a singles bar, they would probably go home together." So, that was my introduction to institutional thought. In any case, here, the title of my paper, System Failures in the Delivery of Primary Goods. And this is a huge subject, and I don't make any pretense of doing real justice to it. And certainly there are many in AFEE whose research touches on one aspect or another of this problem. So what I'm going to do here is, in the first case, sort of identify some basic problems that we have in the production, delivery, the provisioning of what we call primary goods. Okay, and then I'm just going to make a claim here that for the most part, we know what to do about these problems, but we seem unable to execute sort of a reorganization of these activities that would lead to sort of a more broad-based human flourishing. And what I wanted to do tonight is share some of my thoughts on what's holding us up. I think that I can convince you that the systems for provisioning primary goods are not performing up to snuff. Moreover, I think that we, to a large extent, understand what the problems are, but we're nevertheless incapable of making the kind of progressive, intelligent institutional adjustments that are necessary. So why is that? So I've got a little presentation I'm going to go to here. I think that's it. Whoops. Okay. All right. Now I have an introduction and the basic policy question, how to achieve a more broad-based human flourishing. And there's an obvious normative component there. I would think that most people within our organization would agree that a more broad-based human flourishing is a good thing. However, that's not necessarily a universally shared value. I mean, Anne mentioned that I have served for a number of years now on the Arkansas Governor's Council of Economic Advisors. And that's been quite an interesting experience because most of the appointees were appointed by Republican governors. I was appointed by a Democrat, Mike Beebe. But in any case, for those of you that don't know much about Arkansas, this is a big poultry state, so that the poultry barons, along with the Walton family and a few others, sort of dominate the state politically. But you sit in these meetings with these people, and you've got poultry barons and nominees of the Walton family and so forth, and after a few years, you kind of get to see how they think. And they think the real key thing is a narrow flourishing at the top, right? The progress of society. And, they are the givers of employment and hence of life, right? So that, this is not by any means a universally shared value, but nevertheless, one that I think that most economists would embrace. All right, and human flourishing or truly human functioning, this is something that Martha Nussbaum has written about, is obviously contingent on the fulfillment of material needs. Now, what are these primary goods? This is a concept from the philosopher John Rawls, who identified primary goods as those materially produced things that are vital to human development and functioning within a specific economic, cultural, and technological environment. So that I would assert, for example, that the stuff you need for effective functioning as a college student in 2021 is much, much different than what you needed to function effectively 30 years ago as a college student. So this is an evolving market basket of things. Okay. Whoops. Now, the paper is premised on the view that progress will require major improvement and reorganization in the for-profit systems that produce and distribute primary goods. And certainly that shouldn't come as any surprise or shouldn't generate any controversy within this organization. So what I want to do here is first identify some of the causes of spotty performance in the primary goods sector. I mean, given our productive power, why is it that our system is simply not putting large parts of our population in touch with sufficient quantities of these primary goods so that they can achieve, sense capabilities and, achieve truly human functioning or agency. Now, briefly here, let me review some of the properties of these primary goods. And these are all-purpose means or means to whatever goal we might have in life, according to Rawls. And he's saying that, well, if you're rational, you would want these primary goods, whatever else you want. Okay, now, I want to point out here that primary goods can be indivisible and non-rivalrous. So, one of the aspects of good life is, a nice neighborhood where you don't have dilapidated properties, et cetera. Well, only governments can engage in codes enforcement or provide tornado sirens, et cetera. So that certainly there is an important role for the public sector in the provision of primary goods, so that one of the issues I'm going to discuss later is that to achieve better performance here, we really need state and local governments to take a much more expansive role in the provision of these primary goods. However, states have problems raising the finances to do that, so that they would need help to carry out that role. Now, another thing, when we get into definitions of primary goods, and some of you may recall that Keynes talked of goods of the first order and goods of the second order. And goods of the second order sort of cater to our need for favorable, invidious comparison, if you will. So then the question rises, well, could a primary good also be a positional good, or could it cater to the needs of the second order as defined by Keynes? And the answer to that is yes, it can. And sort of one of the unfortunate consequences of our economic development is that many primary goods have morphed into status goods or positional goods as a consequence of the way those industries are organized on a for-profit basis. Excuse me. And later, I'm going to discuss that issue specifically with respect to automobile. Okay. Now, some of you may recall that Bill Duggar and Jim Peach wrote a book in 2009 on the concept of abundance. And this is a concept that was borrowed from commons and then sort of refined or transformed to constitute sort of a normative policy position. So you'll recall that commons use that term era of abundance to denote the period immediately following the so-called age of scarcity. But before the era of stabilization or consolidation, so that the era of abundance, where it was discovered that competition is no way to run a railroad or other super high fixed cost industries, etc. So that you had the era of stabilization, or what might be called the era of administered scarcity, so that the way I understand the argument of Duggar and Peach is that we can take abundance to signify the contemporary capacity for social provisioning based on the accumulated knowledge of ways and means. So that to Duggar and Peach, economic abundance means the wherewithal to fully participate in all community activities and share in all community values. So that there was an AFEE panel in 2013 on the subject of abundance, and that caused me to sort of think through it a little bit. And I came to the conclusion that we can think of abundance not as a state of bliss or satiety induced by the consumption of goods, but rather an inclusive capacity for agency, made possible by the satisfaction of objectively ascertainable needs. So that practically speaking, abundance requires effective and broad provisioning of these primary goods if we're going to get to a situation where we have sort of broad, generalized, high-functioning agency. Okay. Now, in my view, there's been a lot of progress in developing what we might call a thick definition of these objective needs for truly human functioning. And there was a paper by Ian Goff in the Journal of Economic Issues in 1994. And he sort of formal delineation of abundance, or those things that one needs for critical participation in one's form of life. And he denotes the basic needs: physical survival and personal autonomy. And then he defines these 11 cross-cultural components. And we have adequate nutritional food and water, adequate protective housing. And we take a look at that, and despite the, just staggering productive power that we possess, it's still the case that a significant share of our population really doesn't have these things. Okay. Now, another thing here, the research on capabilities, the social capital research, and happiness research. All of this has been very useful in defining in very precise terms exactly what it is that people need to flourish. Okay, now, I just want to discuss some of the factors that account for disappointing performance in the provision of primary goods. And one cause, of course, would be inadequate resources, or we just don't have the accumulated knowledge to distribute, provision primary goods in a way that could achieve our policy objectives. Now, most of us believe that scarcity does not constitute a real hard constraint on our social capacity to solve these problems. And I'm not suggesting that progress here wouldn't require trade-offs, a reallocation of resources. And I'm not claiming that it would not impinge on the interests of certain parties. Certainly it would. However, I'm just claiming as a general principle that we can do a heck of a lot better with the productive power that we have. Now, the problem that most folks concentrate on in our field is the problem of income and wealth maldistribution. So the argument here would be that it's not necessarily a problem with production, distribution of sufficient quantities of primary goods to meet all these needs out there. That's not the issue. The issue is in the distribution of liquid claims to goods, so that if you redistributed income, then those individuals who currently do not have the purchasing power to afford primary goods would be in a better position to do so. And what I'm going to argue here is that while income distribution, transfers, etc., are a good idea and they're going to help, they're not going to solve these problems, right? These problems are really related to problems in the structural organization of these activities, okay? Now, another reason here could be that individuals are simply failing to develop their capabilities. They're not taking advantage of what opportunities may exist. And, no one should discount the possibilities of sort of a dysfunctional culture, such as we see in some of these Rust Belt cities where young people whose parents worked in these factories for generations simply cannot adjust to the new situation, right? And they're not assuming the responsibility to pull themselves out. Well, certainly I'm big on personal responsibility. However, I don't see that as the major problem here. Another problem, problems encountered by states in raising revenues adequate to fund education, public recreation, and other primary goods. So as things stand, we're very dependent on states to provide many of the primary goods that we need, but states have very serious problems in raising revenues. Of course, they can't engage in deficit financing under their state constitutions and so forth. There are other problems. They're not monetary sovereigns like the federal government. So there's limits, right, to what they can do. Now, what I'm highlighting here are organizational structural incentive problems related to the physical production and distribution of housing, healthcare, transportations, education, and other primary goods. Okay. Now, a little brief aside here. I thought you might be interested in this. With respect to the potential impact of cash transfers on social welfare, an interesting thing happened this year in Arkansas. I'm showing you the unemployment rate in Arkansas during the year 2020. And as you can see, it followed the national trends. So that being on this board of economic advisors to the governor, I get a revenue report each month so that the economy is cratering and there's a dependence on sales taxes for revenues. So you figure, well, you're going to be in trouble here because revenues are going to be down. But actually, through November, Arkansas state revenues were up 11.9% from the previous year. How in the world could that have possibly happened? And the answer to that is that there were so many people in Arkansas working in these low-wage jobs that when you had the CARES Act and you had the additional $600 a week in unemployment compensation, personal income in Arkansas actually increased, right? Despite the decrease in earned income. And this had a very favorable effect on business conditions in Arkansas, particularly on car sales. And we were discussing this at the governor's council. And I think it was just a case of getting that unemployment compensation to households with a very high propensity to consume out of current income. At any rate, okay. Now, one of the points that I make in the paper is that one of the obstacles we have is that the public seems to be in this sort of vice grip of obsolescent economic ideas. So that, in attempting to affect these structural reorganizations in these industries that deliver primary goods, you're going to run into a lot of popular opposition on the grounds that you're, engaging in socialism or communism, etc. So that there is this idea that the market is on the order of a natural or supra-institutional force that possesses its own intentionality that stands apart from any human intentionality. And that market intentionality, if left to itself, will lead economic actors to perform in such a way, the invisible best outcomes. And another thing that I seem to run into is that people think that if someone's not making money, if it's not guided by profit, then it is by definition or inherently an inefficient activity, which is simply not the case for many economic activities. So that there's simply no idea of the market as this sort of dense accumulation of rules that have been inherited from the past that give order and security of expectations, but also create running differential advantages for some groups. There's simply not an understanding. So that maybe the damage done by the field of economics or the profession is in promulgating this notion that markets or market forces are in the category of natural forces as opposed to man-made institutional phenomena. Now, to illustrate what I'm talking about here, I want to come up with 3 examples. And with the COVID, is there any doubt that high-speed internet service now qualifies as a primary good and is required for truly human functioning? Well, let's consider this industry. It's got all the characteristics of a natural monopoly. You have increasing returns or economies of high population density, you have high fixed cost, so that the optimal arrangement would involve a single firm that has a franchise and is subject to some kind of regulation or public provision. Okay, well, in Chattanooga, Tennessee, they have a city-owned company. It's called EPB. I don't know if you've heard about that. And they constructed a fiber network in Chattanooga. So Chattanooga, Tennessee, if you can believe it, has the highest quality, cheapest internet service in the United States here. So here we have a model for the appropriate structure of this industry. However, the telecoms industry in Tennessee successfully lobbied the state legislature to restrict the geographic market served by EPB, so that they had a plan. Well, we can extend our market territory and provide these surrounding areas with cheap internet service. But, that wasn't going to happen. And of course, you can talk about the power of the telecoms industry in the state legislature, but in the end, the people of Tennessee are putting up with this. And you wonder why. Now, another thing I want to discuss here has to do with the Postal Service. And, the Postal Service here in the United States continues to have a universal service obligation. I mean, this is in its charter. So they're supposed to make service available to all at reasonable rates. So one would think that postal delivery to all locations at reasonable rates would be sort of a minimum requirement for participation in the mainstream of American life. But these reasonable rates to these remote locations are achieved through this complex system of cross-subsidization, so that postal delivery might be characterized as an unsustainable natural monopoly. And what we're talking about here, for those that maybe haven't had any industrial organization lately, when you have an unsustainable natural monopoly, sort of the efficient structure has one firm. However, entry is profitable, so that the unsustainable natural monopoly is subject to cream skimming by opportunistic firms. And that's exactly what you saw in the package delivery industry, where you have FedEx and you've got UPS, and what they're doing is they're taking the profitable part of the market away, right? They're cream skimming that. And in effect, what they're doing is they're absorbing all those revenues that were available to subsidize service to remote geographic locations. So that at the time when FedEx and UPS were making significant market penetration, postal officials were saying, well, wait, what's needed is a legal restriction on entry, because if we're getting cream skimmed, we're going to be having a very difficult time meeting that universal service objective. Well, this is a long-time structural problem that is now coming to a head. Okay. Now, I mentioned earlier that I want to discuss cars and positional externalities and human development. And I start by saying that for those in the prime development years, let's say 16 to 24, the lack of a good transportation system places cars in the category of primary goods. So that when we have foreign scholars come to the United States, I mean, they're astonished when they see the cars in university parking lots or even in high school parking lots. But the fact of the matter is that if you're a young person in the United States today, given the way that the public transportation system is so poorly developed, I mean, you really got to have a car. That's all there is to it. Now, cars are both primary and positional goods. As such, the purchase of a car by a youth, or perhaps the parents are buying it for the person, this levies positional externalities. So not only do I need a car, I need a certain kind of car for purposes of signaling or social affiliation, so that I've been influenced by the anthropologist Mary Douglas and her thinking about consumption. And her view is that your real moment of choosing is your choice of your fellows or your target social group. You're going to be imitating the consumption regime or patterns of those that you affiliate with or you're seeking to affiliate with. Well, what does this mean? This means that often young people are purchasing cars and it's exacting a very high toll on them in terms of stress and financial pressure. So that the need for income to make car-related payments reinforces pressure on youth to participate in low-wage labor markets. So, having spent some time in Europe, one thing you come to realize is that in the United States, young people are far more integrated into the circular flow of economic activity, both as suppliers of low-wage labor services, but also as consumers, so that their role is to provide cheap labor and to provide effective demand. Development is very important here. And another thing here, one thing that comes up so many times when I'm teaching at a university such as Arkansas State, where you have students that come from families that don't have a lot of resources, and what happens there is that they are spending so much time working just to pay for these cars and the insurance, or alternatively, they're borrowing money. And in most cases, they're doing both. But at any rate, the effort to satisfy this primary need to a large extent is pressuring this population into low-wage labor markets, and it's absorbing scarce time and energy that might otherwise be allocated to capability-enhancing activities. Now, I would add here, and this is something I'm going to talk about here in a moment, this is a system that works to the advantage of business units that employ low-wage labor. So I'll mention something about that in a minute here. So this is probably another case of what Wolfram Elsner calls, in that game theoretic context, so that we've got lock in an inferior state. I mean, how are we going to solve this problem? It's quite formidable, I think. Okay. Now, I'm briefly going to here talk about some of the major obstacles to change. I mean, in most cases, we know what to do. Healthcare. I think we know what to do there to get better performance in that industry. High-speed internet should be regulated like the telephone company used to be. We should grant exclusive franchises or, have public provision, etc. But what I want to discuss are some things that I see as, very difficult obstacles to overcome. Hey, and of course, J.M. Keynes, he says, well, vested interest is overrated compared to the inertial force of defunct economic ideas. So I wonder if Keynes would change his mind if he knew about the Citizens United decision in the United States that has permitted these very wealthy people to dominate the political process. But in any case here. Now, another issue here, there was a paper by Rajhat Absar in 2014. And he made the point that a lot of those basic economic ideas that are settled out there have normative implications with respect to the worthiness of some groups to receive publicly funded or subsidized primary goods. So that again, economic theory comes in for criticism here because often it is used as a sort of moral allegory to explain why certain groups or individuals should not get certain things. And I would encourage you to read that very fine paper. Okay, another thing here. If you read Clarence Ayres, he comments that, if you have progress in terms of a more broad-based human flourishing where people have agency, and as a result, they are not under so much pressure vis-a-vis employers or producers of goods, etc. Ayres pointed out that if we have progress, it's sure to royal status hierarchies, and it's going to meet with vigorous resistance. And another thing, now, this observation may be a consequence of my having lived too long in the state of Arkansas. I don't think so. What I think we've seen, big corporations don't provide the employment that they used to. So that small business is accounting for a much greater share of total employment than it once did. Well, small businesses really emerged as a dominant underpinning authority in the United States. I mean, if you look at that 2001 tax bill, this was the Bush tax bill, where you had all the goodies for the pass-through companies and so forth, all the special tax provisions for small business, et cetera. That really marked a major shift, I think, in the status of small business and their economic or their political influence in the United States. Okay, now, a more generalized flourishing would diminish the withholding power of small business vis-a-vis employees in labor market transactions. So what I'm suggesting here is that in this new era of post-industrialism, post-Fordism, we have a new regime of relations of production, if you will. involving small business and their employees. Now, I realize when we talk about small business, we're talking about a vast heterogeneous population of enterprises, many of which do employ high paid labor. But for the most part, that's not the case, you see. So that in sounding out small business people over the last few years, what they're most concerned about is having a supply of low wage labor. In fact, excuse me, they quite literally see their survival as dependent on that, and they're always complaining about it, right? And also, if you look at the opposition to Obamacare and the Medicaid expansion, which is actually part of Obamacare, as well as the expanded unemployment benefits, this was mainly coming from small business. And many of these small businesses have less than 50 employees, so they weren't out of pocket one penny on this Obamacare thing. But they see health insurance as something that might weaken someone's incentive to work for them at very low wages. You know, anything that strengthens the position of those who would otherwise supply low wage labor is to be, opposed. Okay, I'm running out of time here, so let me just make some summary remarks here. First, income transfers, employer of last resort, or ex nihilo creation of money for distribution to low income families. Evidently, the MMT people think that it's possible to create money out of thin air and we could distribute it to households. If we did that, then they could buy more primary goods and we would be okay. Those things will help, and I'm certainly not opposing a much more expansive transfer regime such as we see in the Scandinavian countries. However, this is not going to solve the problem. You know, this problem lies in problems in the organization of these industries, specifically the fact that they are run on a for-profit basis. So what we need, in my view, thinking about natural monopoly, increasing returns, universal service, and common carrier. In case you haven't noticed, if you look at the more recent textbooks in industrial organization, they seem to have changed their tune about the existence of natural monopoly, increasing returns, as well as other industries that have these structural characteristics that, if they were to be run on a for-profit basis, would give rise to inferior results. Now, I argue in the paper that progress will require a greatly expanded role for state and local governments, and there's a need for more revenue sharing with the federal government. And then finally, can people be convinced that many primary goods have properties such that their provision on a for-profit basis leads to inferior outcomes for society? So that I'm reminded of a comment that was once made by John Kenneth Galbraith, and he noted that he hoped we could just get to the point where we could say that the market, or whatever it is that we have, this corporate system or centralized private sector planning or whatever you want to call it, it does a lot of things well. Okay, we're not advocating overturning the basis of private property. We're not doing any of that. Okay, all we're trying to do is convince people that there are certain industries that have special properties, such as healthcare or internet, such that their provision on a for-profit basis leads to inferior outcomes for society. And with that, I will conclude. Thank you very much.
Thank-
And I'm happy to take any questions. Yes, Ann.
Okay, Chris, you made many points and made them well that I think I'm in agreement with, but I'm a little disturbed at the very end of your paper, your presentation, when it seems to me that what you are doing is coming back around to the market failures kind of argument that I have come to detest, in which colleges of business, departments of economics, all sorts of apologists for the existing order say the problem is really not fundamental. It's just that we have some market failures.
Right.
Can you reassure me that you have not succumbed to that kind of cop-out?
Well, there should be a clarification in the paper about that, because I'm troubled by the concept of market failures as well, because to use that term almost presupposes that we ought to hold up the market as the form.
Exactly.
That's what we should be shooting for. And if they're failures, then perhaps they could be corrected and you could still have a market solution. And I'm certainly not saying that. Okay. And also, as Munkers and many others have written about, what we have is not a market system as that term is popularly understood, right? I mean, these are organizations that have replaced markets with hierarchies, right? Okay. So that, obviously markets don't work for many companies. That's why they replace them with internal and accounting transfers. But I think you're absolutely right about that.
Okay. Okay.
Other questions? Okay, Eric's got a question. Let me see here.
He's asking the ASSA coordinator if we can change this so that participants can act directly, not through chat. I do believe there is a way. Kelsey, can you?
Yeah, I'm afraid I haven't been able to figure out how to do that. So at the moment, we can review the Q&A section to see if people want to raise questions there, but somehow I'm hoping the ASSA person will be able to allow people to speak.
I think the problem is that this was set up as a webinar,
Yeah.
whatever one says. And
that was the case with with many of the other program sessions, but
okay.
I'm afraid the technology is beating me at the moment.
Okay.
So we can keep an eye on the Q&A, and people can raise questions there if they want to.
Yeah. I'm looking at it.
Okay.
Well, as I look at the list of people who have participated, I cannot believe that there are not some questions, objections, etc. from this
Usually
crowd.
associate a little talking with some of the names. Yeah.
Yeah, I recognize that I recognize that probably many of us are in agreement with Chris about the failures. What I found interesting is I think there's some ways to some different perspectives that Chris offers in thinking about and using Rawls' notion of primary goods. I must say that was not what I first thought of when I saw the title of your paper, because I wasn't thinking about John Rawls. I tend not to think about much about John Rawls. I tend to try not to think about him at all. But I think the idea of the primary goods as being those which are time and culturally specific as a requirement for the kind of growth and achievement that Amartya Sen talked about. I think that makes a very different case. And it seems to me that you could go back with this to Deb Figert's paper last night and began to flesh out a new definition of a sort of good society, what is required for that, and that that it may require not only, excuse me, provisioning of things such as internet connections or private automobiles or things which maybe not everyone would say or would necessarily think of as necessary, but they become necessary in our society. But I would also like to suggest that a good society might require some more social determination of what those primary goods are. If, for example, we had a more humane and civilized and reasonable transportation system, not only in cities, but between cities, we wouldn't all need automobiles. We could rely upon subways and trains and other things. I mean, I'm sure there are many other examples that one can think of ways that the primary goods can be reconfigured. And so we should not let the profit motive or the profit-driven markets, we should not let them determine what those primary goods are in the first instance.
Correct. Yeah.
We do have a couple comments, questions that are coming in. I did want to say I agreed very much with Chris's talk and share the concern. At least the way I've been thinking about it is that we have just allowed market habits for the organization and distribution of goods and incomes to perpetuate some earlier practices that have been around for a long period of time, even in a modern industrial state in which we have the opportunity for a great deal more wealth and income. And some other mechanism needs to be established, ultimately coming out of the state or some other organization that would allow us to more effectively ensure that we can meet our basic needs and live a life of abundance. But Chris or Ann, if you want to take care of the questions.
No, okay, no, go ahead.
I've got one. I've got one from Deb Thagart, and she's saying that she likes Nussbaum capabilities. Sometimes she is critiqued for making lists of needs, capabilities, thus are primary goods in the eye of the beholder. Do they evolve over time? Are they different by country and society? And I would say to Deb that to some extent, it is a matter of interpretation, although I would say that needs housing and clothing, healthcare and those sorts of things. I mean, there's no doubt that the market basket of critical primary goods evolves over time, so that here in the United States, I read an article about a family that has a very high income by any normal standard, but yet they're incredibly stressed because of all these expenditures for cell phones, internet service, cars, clothing, all these things that their kids need to maintain their standing within their group, et cetera, or to avoid embarrassment and that sort of thing. So that in the case of cars, I'm just suggesting there that it was an unfortunate path of development that our transportation system followed this way, because now it imposes this very onerous burden on young people. And I think it is responsible for a lot of debt that young people are carrying and other negative consequences. And here's Greg Hayden. How might you suggest we can change status and invidious comparison to primary goods? For example, clothing is responsible for about 25% of greenhouse gases, and each pair of jeans takes about 400 gallons of water. How do you return clothing to be a primary good? And the thing that comes to mind there would be Bill Clinton's suggestion of school uniforms, I guess, right? That I mean, that plan was designed to cope with these sort of consumption externalities in clothing for young people. So I don't know if that's a very good answer for Greg. I mean, obviously there needs to be cultural change, right? Happen, I would think.
Hello, Chris. The ASSA has given me the link that's needed if you would like to have, if somebody would like to talk, I can do that now to ask their question.
Okay, Carol Sutton asks, speak more about how primary goods are indivisible and non-rivalrous. Well, the obvious examples there would be things like flood control, tornado sirens, codes enforcement. These are all things that I would argue contribute to our well-being. But nevertheless, these are indivisible, right? I mean, you can't, sound the tornado siren on an individual basis. It either has to be turned on or turned off, so that it does have public good characteristics. And I'm just suggesting there that it's difficult to pin down this concept of primary goods. To borrow from George Rogan, it's really a dialectical as opposed to arithmomorphic concept. It defies easy definition, sort of like an institution, you see. Okay. And I've got a comment from Dravda, but I don't think there's a question there. Did you have something to say, Eric?
The ASSA support said that they've also added the ability to raise your hand, and they have given me, I can now identify the ability to allow a person to talk if there is anybody that would like to ask a question directly. I did see in the question and answers, there was a question from Eugenia Coria. I was maybe distracted. I don't know if you had the chance to see that comment from her. I'd be happy to turn anybody on. That doesn't sound right. To turn on anybody's microphone if they would like to raise their questions that way.
Well, let me jump in here, take advantage of the fact that my mic is already open. Chris, in some ways, as I think about what you said today, I wonder if really what you're doing is suggesting that we throw out the textbooks that have been written for the past 40 or 50 years, maybe a few exceptions, but go back to an earlier kind of economics, in which there was a lot more discussion about natural monopoly, the need for regulation, the idea of goods that we all benefit from. Many of the old ideas that were there seem to me to have been submerged, and just we need to bring back an emphasis. Could I reinterpret you to be saying that?
I think that's an accurate, because I was kind of raised with the conventional industrial organization.
Exactly.
And, there were some pretty subtle views on how to treat certain market situations. And those seem to have fallen into abeyance. And certainly there is a large industry of economists that make it their business to do theoretical demonstrations of why the privatization of this activity is welfare enhancing, et cetera. So it's a very difficult thing to go up against. There's no doubt.
Jim Beach.
Chris, yeah, Jim, I think I've turned off your microphone, or at least tried to do so, and now you need to turn yours off. You need to turn your microphone on, and you should be able to talk.
Unmute.
There you go. Sounds good.
Chris, I liked your presentation. I liked your paper. And I'm sure Bill Duggar joins me in thanking you for the shout out. Very few people reference our 2009 book, which was published, of course, at the beginning of the great financial crisis or the Great Recession, and sold 17 copies. One thing I would suggest is that the antitrust laws and the idea of regulating natural monopoly, that there was a purpose beyond economics there. It was a purpose to control political power. And you might want to weave that in there. The other thing I would suggest is to go back and read Heirs Toward a Reasonable Society, where he has a list of the things that you're talking about. You may not like that list. And that's about it. But thank you for a great presentation. And thank you, Ann, for a great introduction to Chris. I'm done.
Okay, thanks, Jim.
Yeah, there was a really great article in The Nation years ago, and this came about at the time of the Microsoft antitrust prosecution. And this was written by Eben Moglen, who is a law professor at Columbia. And he was discussing sort of the political environment around the passage of the Sherman Antitrust Act. And I know this is something that Ann Mayhew has worked on as well. But you're right. It was not so much economic as political, or fear of this concentration of economic and political power. So that it was very much in that sort of Jacksonian temper, right? So I don't think there's any doubt about that.
If I may step in again to say, Chris, And to Jim, I think one of the great things that has happened over this past year, when there were certainly not many great things that happened, but one was that we really are talking about power again, I think, in a way that we have, the way we have not been for a long time. What to do about Facebook and all of the other whatever we call them, the Silicon Valley power centers. What to do about them brings really right to the front the inadequacy of our antitrust laws. And if you go back and read the history of those antitrust laws and the creation of the kind of new textbooks, it was a concerted effort made in the 1930s and 1940s, a concerted effort that was focused or was located in Chicago, not surprisingly, to recast our treatment of the power exerted by firms as simply a kind of market power that could be addressed through market manipulation. And the idea of political power, social power, all the other things that we are dancing around here in this discussion when we talk about, as Greg Hayden did, whether or not people should want fancy cars or just cars, or whether they should wear fancy clothes or just clothes. All of those sorts of things were dismissed in this process of taming the idea of power. Power went away as a concept that economists could deal with unless they dealt with it as power over price. That was the only power that mattered. I think one of the things that's happened in the year 2020 is we may actually be prepared to talk about power again. And I would say that is something that institutionalists ought to welcome and ought to do. I mean, they ought to all get out and talk about power, but go back and look at some of what was written in an earlier time when economists were not so afraid of talking about power.
I'd like to mention I was having the opportunity to work some with Glenn Atkinson and Stephen Pascal, and we had been updating, we've been working on a book project and updating some of the work that we had been, each of us have done on the earlier development of the corporation. And through Steve's work, his explanation of the regulations for the social control of the corporation, how a lot of the earlier legislation identified that the corporation was a creation of the state, and so we could change it and run it the way we want to run it. And I was happy that we were able to include that in the title of our book and update that to the current period of time, what's now being called generally financialization, the financialization process in the late 20th century. So moving from a system of social control where we identified and recognized the power of the state to manage these things and manage the power of private enterprise and business structures, and then also what we have essentially forsaken with this financialization process. I did want to see, I noted an earlier comment from Eugenia Correa, who had a question for Chris. It was a little earlier in the list, and I didn't know if you'd gotten to see it, Chris. So I'll go ahead and read it out. I didn't see any more hands raised. If anybody else raises their hand, we'll turn on your mic. But here from Eugenia, it says, congratulations. This morning we discussed about work and the main obstacles to build up the full employment. So what do you think about, processes to try to grow full employment? I think that's the way I would read that.
Well, I would support the Keynesian solutions of stimulating effective demand. And of course, I'm also very big on publicly funded job training that should be available at any point in one's life. So I think that hits at the demand side and the supply side. Other than that, I don't think that I have any, I mean, obviously a lot of my work is in the field of post-Keynesian economics, and in the book that Anne made reference to, I argued that in the sort of post-1987 period, with the development of securities collateralized by consumer receivables. This had the effect of greatly expanding access to credit for individuals, situated all along the credit worthiness or credit scoring spectrum. And the effect of this was to make the US economy much more dependent on the expansion of consumer credit to achieve growth. And after a period of years, of course, this was showing up on household balance sheets, and you could document using microdata the very negative effect on debt or a borrowing on the household balance sheets, relative to income, so that of course, when we talk about income distribution, I can't remember the guy's name, the equity versus efficiency guy from Washington, St. Louis, whatever it was, but what I've tried to convince people, David Hamilton used to talk about, our big problem is, recycling those revenues in the circular flow that are leaking out so as to maintain full employment. And I argued that your distribution of income should be evaluated on the criterion of macroeconomic efficiency, right? That is, for a given distribution of income, how much spending are you getting, if that makes sense, right? And this inefficiency in terms of distribution and its connection to effective demand was hidden by this enormous reliance on debt. So that certainly in terms of achieving stronger effective demand on a permanent basis, income redistribution policies are to be recommended because they make us less reliant on debt to sustain consumption.
I do want to mention the current structure of our conversation has a hard limit where they actually just turn off the cameras directly at like 7:31 is when it hits.
There was one,
So-
Eric, there was one anonymous comment that
Oh,
didn't
yes.
get picked up on the Q&A. It was from someone who asked about, shouldn't we have public education to provide the computer skills, et cetera, that people need to grow up into fully functioning adults in modern society. And of course, I think most of us would probably agree, yes. But again, I think that's a case where we need to talk about power. And the one of the dreadful things that's happened is this the use of the market as primary argument to promote charter schools, et cetera, to stop treating education as a public good. I'll just wind up my comments by saying that I think Chris is arguing for a return to the use of the idea of public goods to cover a much broader array of things, including public education and how to use computers and how to write the sentence and how to do all sorts of things. And I've enjoyed being part of this. I'll sign off now.
Thank
On
you very
that
much,
comment,
Ann. Great to see
Yeah.
you.
I did want to mention on this issue of education and youth and the problems of integrating them into a more effective position. There was an excellent panel earlier today on neoliberalism, and Future of Neoliberalism and the Way Forward. It was just an excellent panel. And Carol Gil Vasquez talking about the circumstances in Mexico, describing what's happened as the criminalization of youth with the financialization of their economy, and how a substantial portion of the population is now being treated as this excess, an unnecessary excess. And so it made me think of what we've done in the United States with the prison to the school to prison pipeline, where a substantial portion of our population isn't receiving sufficient education and are really being marginalized from a very, very early age, and the collapse of the educational process and the charter system and all of the rest of that has really exacerbated that. But great paper, essentially about the failure of the double movement without a democratic turn. What sort of authoritarian and repressive drift are we into in the current time period? So now is a good time to talk about power.
Any more questions? I don't see any.
Would you like to make a few closing remarks, Chris? Or
Well, I'd just like to say thank you to everyone for coming, and the Association for Evolutionary Economics has meant a tremendous amount to me for a long time, and I really regret that I'm not able to see you folks. As I mentioned at the board meeting, it's just a great thing to reconnect with like-minded people after working at a place like this all year. Not that I don't have some nice colleagues, but so at any rate, I sure hope to see you physically down the road. Thank you for coming, and I hope you're enjoying the conference. What I've seen so far, I think the papers have been very good, and I wish you a much better 2021. I mean, it can't be worse, can it?
I wouldn't tempt fate on that one. Yeah.
Thank you, Chris. Goodbye, all.
Thank you,
All
Chris.
right.
Thank
Take
you,
care,
Chris.
everyone.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you very much,
Bye-bye.
Chris.